The chandeliers of the Harrington estate glittered like 100 captured stars, their glow spilling across the polished marble floors of the grand ballroom. Perfumed air mingled with the low hum of violins, the laughter of nobles, and the rustle of silk gowns sweeping across the floor. Tonight was meant to be her night. Lady Elara Whitmore had prepared for weeks. Every stitch of her gown, every curl in her hair, every breath she took seemed to lead to this moment. The moment when the Duke of Ashford, a man whispered about in salons and envied in gentlemen's clubs, would honour her by claiming the first dance. Elara stood poised at the edge of the ballroom, her gloved hands clasped delicately, her chest rising and falling with a mixture of nerves and anticipation. She could feel the eyes of society upon her, not in scorn, not yet, but in envy. Whispers had long circled that the Duke's attentions had fallen upon her, and many had speculated that tonight he would make a public declaration of sorts. A dance, after all, was more than just a dance. It was a claim, a promise. Her emerald gown shimmered beneath the golden light, lace cascading across her shoulders, the shade chosen carefully to match the flecks of green in her eyes. She looked every inch the noblewoman she was raised to be, though in her heart she felt more fragile than the porcelain teacups displayed in her family's drawing room. Then came the moment. The orchestra struck up the opening strains of the waltz, and conversation hushed as the Duke entered. Tall, commanding, his black coat tailored to perfection, his ivory cravat a stark contrast against the strength of his jaw. He was the picture of aristocratic elegance. The crowd parted like water before him. Elara's breath caught as his gaze swept the room, lingering for the briefest of seconds upon her. Her heart leapt. This was it. But then he turned away. A ripple of shock coursed through the gathering as the Duke crossed the ballroom floor, not toward Elara, but toward another. Lady Cassandra Harrow, radiant in crimson silk, smirked triumphantly as he bowed before her, offering his hand. Gasps echoed, fans snapped open in a flutter of feathers, and Elara felt the blood drain from her face. She stood frozen as the Duke led Cassandra onto the dance floor. The music swelled, couples whirled, and laughter rang out, but all she could hear was the deafening roar of humiliation in her ears. Every glance burned, sympathetic from some, mocking from others, but none kind. She had been made a spectacle. Poor girl, someone whispered nearby. How cruel, to be abandoned so publicly. I always said the Duke had better taste than to choose her. Elara's throat tightened, but she forced her chin higher. If she faltered now, if she let them see her crumble, the scandal would be complete. Still her hands trembled as she clutched her skirts, her heart breaking beneath the crushing weight of betrayal. She had believed in him, believed that beneath his cold, aloof exterior there was a man who saw her. And now, before the entire ton, he had dismissed her as if she were nothing. The dance seemed endless. Cassandra glowed in victory, her laughter like a blade slicing deeper into Elara's pride. The Duke remained impassive, unreadable as ever, yet his choice spoke louder than words. He had not only chosen another woman, he had chosen to shame Elara. When at last the waltz ended, Elara turned away before the tears could spill. She fled to the shadowed edges of the ballroom, the sting of whispers following her like a cruel chorus. Her father's disapproving frown met her as she passed, her mother's face pale with horror. Still, neither offered comfort. In this world, appearances mattered more than wounds of the heart. Out on the balcony, the night air was cold, cruelly refreshing against her burning cheeks. Elara clutched the stone railing, her emerald skirts pooling around her, as the muffled strains of music drifted through the open doors. Inside, laughter and gossip flourished, but out here she could breathe. She closed her eyes, forcing herself to steady her breath, to gather the shattered pieces of her dignity. But the truth could not be undone. In one single, deliberate act, the Duke of Ashford had ruined her, and society would never let her forget it. The morning after the ball, London awoke buzzing with whispers sharper than daggers. Servants carried tales across breakfast tables, footmen repeated the scandal in hushed tones to their masters, and by noon, Lady Alara Whitmore's humiliation was the only story worth telling. The Duke ignored her, abandoned her, chose another before all of society's eyes. The words spread like wildfire, each telling more cruel than the last. By midday, caricatures appeared in Bond Street shop windows, a young lady left standing alone while a nobleman twirled a faceless rival in exaggerated grandeur. Alara's green gown, once her pride, was immortalized in mocking ink strokes. Her family's crest, hastily scrawled in corners, left no doubt as to whom the sketch referred. Ladies laughed behind gloved hands, and gentlemen smirked knowingly. For Alara, it was not simply the pain of betrayal, it was the unbearable sting of becoming a jest. At Whitmore House the air was heavier than stone. Her father, Lord Whitmore, refused to meet her eyes at breakfast. "You have brought disgrace upon us," he muttered, though it had not been her hand that rejected, nor her choice to be slighted. Her mother wept quietly behind her teacup, lamenting the ruined prospects of a daughter now branded as undesirable. Alara sat silent, her spoon clinking against her untouched porridge, every breath threatening to shatter the fragile composure she held. The cruel irony was that she had done nothing wrong. She had stood with grace, endured the Duke's betrayal without collapsing, and fled before tears could betray her. Strength. Yet society never blamed the powerful. The Duke remained unscathed. Whispers excused his actions as a simple change of favour. Cassandra Harrow was lauded as a dazzling enchantress, her victory celebrated by jealous rivals. And Alara, she was painted as the pitiable fool. When she ventured out days later, she felt the stares. In the marketplace, two young debutantes tittered openly when she passed, one mimicking her forlorn expression, the other sighing dramatically, "Where is my Duke tonight?" Alara kept walking, her head high, though her cheeks burned. On the steps of St. James, an older matron whispered just loudly enough, "A lesson to girls who reach beyond their station." Alara's fists clenched in her gloves, nails biting into her palms, but she refused to flinch. Inside, however, her heart cracked with every word. She returned home each evening with a smile carved carefully across her lips, only to collapse into tears behind her locked door. It was there, in solitude, that she faced the truth. Her life as she had known it was over. Marriage prospects would vanish, her reputation was tainted. She could live in bitterness, broken by humiliation, or she could choose a harder path, one of defiance. That decision came unexpectedly one afternoon. She was walking the gardens when she overheard the gardeners discussing the ball. "Poor lass," one murmured, "left like a lamb to slaughter." Alara stopped, her chest tightening, until the second man added, "Yet she stood like a queen, not a tear, not a whimper, not in front of them at least. Takes strength, that does." Strength. The word struck her like lightning. Had she not endured the fire of ridicule, had she not borne the cruel eyes of society without bowing, perhaps she was not as broken as she thought. Perhaps the world expected her to wither, but she would not grant them the satisfaction. That evening, Alara descended to dinner dressed not in pale colours of apology, but in a bold sapphire gown that deepened the green of her eyes. Her mother gasped softly, her father scowled, But Ilara met their gazes unflinching. "If I am to be mocked," she said quietly, "let it be as myself, not as a shadow." From that night onward, she began to rebuild herself piece by piece. She attended gatherings, not as the blushing hopeful she once was, but as a woman who walked with quiet dignity, even when whispers followed her like smoke. She smiled at cruel remarks, answered gossip with calm indifference, and began to command a strange sort of respect. Society could not decide whether to scorn or admire her resilience. And though she told herself she was free of him, deep inside, the Duke's betrayal still burned. For every time she lifted her chin against gossip, for every time she steeled her heart against laughter, she thought of him, his hand leading Cassandra, his indifference that cut sharper than a blade. It was this wound, still raw, that would one day make his return so shattering. For weeks after the Harrington ball, the Duke of Ashford lived as though nothing had happened. To his peers, he was the same aloof figure, coldly polite, untouchable, and impossible to read. He dined with lords, hunted with gentlemen, and danced with ladies who flung themselves into his path, desperate for a moment of his notice. Yet behind the mask, a quiet unrest grew, gnawing at him like a persistent thorn. It began with silence. He realized one evening that Lady Ilara Whitmore's absence was deafening. He had grown accustomed, though he never admitted it, to the calm steadiness of her presence at gatherings. She had never simpered like the others, never begged for his attention. There was a dignity to her that had both intrigued and unsettled him. Now, stripped from society's inner circle, her absence left a hollow echo that no other woman's laughter could fill. He told himself her disgrace was necessary, that a duke could not be shackled to a woman whispered about as ordinary. Cassandra Harrow had been the practical choice, dazzling, ambitious, capable of elevating his already formidable standing. But as days turned to weeks, Cassandra's presence grew cloying. Her laughter, once flattering, now rang false. Her beauty, though striking, seemed shallow compared to the quiet fire in Ilara's green eyes. The first sting of jealousy came at a musical hosted by Lady Pembroke. The Duke entered with his usual command, expecting the room to turn toward him. Instead, his gaze fell upon Ilara. She had arrived with her cousin, her sapphire gown catching the lamplight, her smile polite yet cool. The room still whispered, of course, it always would, but he saw something startling. They no longer whispered with mockery alone. Some whispered with admiration. A young baron hovered at her side, bending close to whisper a jest that made her lips curve in a small smile. It was not laughter at him, not scorn. It was genuine joy shared with another man. Something hot and sharp clenched in the Duke's chest. He had never thought of Ilara as his possession. At least he had convinced himself of that. But the sight of her entertaining another's attentions sent a dark current through his blood. All evening he could not tear his eyes from her. He danced, yes, but the women in his arms blurred into faceless shadows while his gaze tracked Ilara across the room. She moved with a grace born of defiance, her chin high, her dignity intact despite the storm he had hurled her into. And in that moment the Duke felt the first pang of regret pierce through his pride. Why had he humiliated her? What madness had seized him to discard her so publicly? He had convinced himself it was strategy, a choice made in cold reason. But now, stripped of self-deception, he admitted the truth. He had been afraid of the way she made him feel, afraid of the softness in his own heart whenever she looked at him with quiet understanding. Cassandra was safe, predictable, shallow. Ilara was dangerous because she had the power to undo him. That night, sleep eluded him. He paced his study, glass in hand, replaying every detail of the ball. Her face when he passed her by, the way her lips trembled, though she did not cry, the steel in her spine as she stood alone. Guilt gnawed at him, twisting tighter with each memory. But guilt alone was not enough to break a man like the Duke of Ashford. It was jealousy that shattered him. Days later, he overheard that Lord Bertram, the same baron who had lingered at her side, had called upon her. The gossip reached him through idle chatter at his club, but it struck like a thunderclap. The idea of another man courting her, of another claiming her smile, her loyalty, her heart, it was unbearable. He realized then what he had lost. Ilara had not been a passing amusement. She had been the only woman who made him feel alive, who challenged his arrogance, not with rebellion, but with dignity. And he had thrown her away. For the first time in years, the Duke felt something he had thought himself incapable of: fear. Not fear of society, nor fear of scandal. He had weathered both. This was fear of losing her forever. And so the walls of pride he had built around himself began to crack. The Duke of Ashford, untouchable and unbending, was forced to face the truth. If he did not act, if he did not humble himself, Lady Ilara Whitmore would slip beyond his grasp, and he would never know the chance of redemption. The question was not whether he wanted her back. The question was whether she would ever forgive him. The Whitmore household was abuzz with unusual activity the night of the Montrose Gala. It was the grandest affair of the season, second only to the Queen's Ball, and Ilara's family insisted she attend despite her protests. "The only way to silence gossip is to walk through it with your head high," her mother urged, fastening pearls at her daughter's throat. Ilara, though weary of being the subject of whispers, resolved to go, not for society, not for her family's sake, but for herself. She had hidden long enough. The Montrose ballroom glittered with candlelight and mirrored walls that multiplied the glow 100-fold. Gold and ivory decorations draped the hall, and a string quartet played a lively tune as couples glided across the polished floor. Ilara entered on her cousin's arm, her gown of deep emerald silk flowing like water with every step. Conversations paused, eyes turned. Some smirked, some admired, but all noticed. Ilara had become, unwillingly, a figure that commanded attention. She bore the stairs with quiet grace, offering no hint of the storm within. Only when she caught sight of Cassandra Harrow preening in crimson at the far side of the room did her pulse quicken. Cassandra's smirk was cruel, her gaze dripping triumph. Ilara braced herself for another night of subtle slights and mocking whispers. What she did not expect, what no one expected, was the entrance of the Duke of Ashford. The crowd shifted as he strode into the hall, every line of his posture radiating command. His eyes, sharp as steel, scanned the room until they landed on her. For the briefest moment, time froze. The chatter dimmed, the music seemed distant, and Ilara's breath caught in her throat. What was he doing here? After weeks of silence, after leaving her to endure ruin, why had he come now? Whispers spread like wildfire. The Duke? Is he here for Cassandra? No. Look at whom he's watching. The Duke did not pause to greet acquaintances or offer idle pleasantries. He crossed the floor with purposeful strides, the crowd parting instinctively. He stopped before Ilara, bowing low, not with the detached courtesy for which he was known, but with something raw, almost desperate. Gasps rippled through the gathering. "Lady Ilara," he said, his voice carrying through the stunned silence, "I have come to beg your forgiveness." The world seemed to tilt. Ilara stared at him, every muscle in her body rigid. This was the man who had humiliated her, who had tossed her aside for Cassandra's shallow charms, who had left her to face ridicule alone. And now, before all of London's finest, he humbled himself at her feet. Murmurs swelled around them. Some scoffed at the impropriety, others leaned forward with rapt attention. Cassandra's face blanched, fury flashing in her eyes as she realized what was happening. The Duke of Ashford, the man she had claimed as hers, was not here for her at all. Ilara's heart pounded. She wanted to speak, to lash out, to demand why he thought he could repair with words the damage he had wrought. Yet she found herself mute, caught between fury and the lingering ache of love she thought she had buried. The Duke straightened, his voice steady though his eyes betrayed urgency. "I wronged you, I shamed you before the world, and for that I deserve nothing but your disdain. Yet I cannot remain silent. I cannot bear to see you stand in another's company, to watch the light of your spirit claimed by anyone but me. I beg you, Ilara, grant me one chance to prove that my heart belongs only to you." The room was silent, but for the Duke's words, heavy and unyielding. A duke kneeling in vulnerability was unheard of. For a man of his stature to bow to a woman he had once humiliated, it was nothing short of scandalous. Ilara's breath shook. Her pride screamed at her to turn away, to let him suffer as she had suffered. Yet another voice, quieter but insistent, whispered of the sincerity in his gaze, the unguarded tremor in his tone. He was not the same man who had humiliated her. He was a man stripped bare by remorse. "You think a single plea can erase what you did?" she asked finally, her voice cutting through the hush. "You humiliated me before them all. You left me broken, mocked, scorned. Why should I forgive you?" The Duke's eyes softened, though his jaw tightened with resolve. "Because I have learned what it is to lose you, and I would face the mockery of the entire world if only it meant earning back a fragment of your trust." Her chest ached. The crowd leaned forward, breathless, waiting for her reply. For the first time, it was not she who stood humiliated, but he. And though she longed to make him wait, to twist the knife as he had once twisted it in her, Ilara found herself caught in the gravity of a moment neither of them could undo. For in his plea, she saw something society had never dared imagine. The mighty Duke of Ashford brought to his knees, not by scandal, but by love. The hush in the Montrose ballroom stretched until it was nearly unbearable. Dozens of eyes bore into Ilara, waiting for her to speak. To forgive the Duke in this moment would mean surrendering not only her heart, but also her pride. To reject him would wound him before society, but risk shattering any chance at happiness she might still secretly crave. She inhaled, steadying herself. "You humiliated me once," she said, her voice low but sharp, carrying across the room. "And now you ask me to trust that you will not do so again. Tell me, Your Grace, what assurances do I have that this will not end in further ruin?" The Duke, still bowed, lifted his head slowly. "You have only my word," he said, his voice rich with conviction. "But know this, I would rather burn my title to ash than see you endure another moment's scorn because of me." Gasps followed his declaration. For a man of his stature, whose very identity was woven into the power of his dukedom, to suggest such a sacrifice was staggering. But Ilara's pride remained firm. She could not allow herself to be swayed by words alone, no matter how heartfelt they seemed. Her lips curved in a faint, bitter smile. "Your word, my lord, was worth very little the last time I trusted it." The Duke flinched, as though struck. Yet he did not retreat. Instead, he rose slowly, his tall frame casting a shadow over her, his gaze never leaving hers. Then test me, Ilara. Give me trial, give me hardship, give me scorn. I will endure them all if it means proving that I am not the man who abandoned you. The crowd murmured, restless with excitement and disbelief. Never had they seen the Duke of Ashford so stripped of his arrogance, so raw in his desperation. Cassandra Harrow, white with fury, tried to interject, but her words drowned beneath the buzz of scandal. Ilara's cousin touched her arm gently, as though to guide her away from the scene, but Ilara shook her head. She would not run this time, not from whispers, not from mockery, and not from him. "Very well," she said, her chin tilting upward. "If you wish to prove yourself, then do so not with words but with actions. Show me, here and now, that you value me above society's approval. For it was society you chose over me before." Her challenge struck like thunder. A collective gasp rolled across the ballroom, followed by a tense, expectant silence. The Duke's eyes narrowed, but not with anger, with resolve. He turned, slowly, to face the entire assembly. His gaze swept over lords and ladies, over Cassandra's livid face, over the gaping crowd. Then, in a gesture so bold it would be spoken of for generations, he lowered himself to one knee before Ilara. "My pride cost me the woman I love," he declared, his voice strong, unshaken. "I will not let it cost me again. Let the whole of London whisper, let them mock me if they will. I would rather kneel before you than stand above any other." The ballroom erupted, some with shock, others with admiration, many with scandalized outrage. A duke kneeling before a woman he had once scorned. It was unthinkable, unprecedented. Yet there he was, proud even in supplication, his every word echoing with sincerity. Ilara's throat tightened, emotion warring with pride. This was the very man who had broken her heart, reduced her to gossip's favorite subject. And now, before those same wagging tongues, he had made himself vulnerable in a way she had never thought possible. She could have ended it there. She could have rejected him, left him humiliated as he had once left her. The temptation was sharp, almost intoxicating, but when she looked into his eyes, she saw no trace of mockery, no calculation, only raw, unguarded truth. "Rise," she said softly, her voice trembling despite her best efforts. He stood, towering once more, but his expression remained uncertain, almost boyish in its hope. "I will not forgive easily," Ilara continued, her gaze steady. "Nor will I forget. You will have to prove every day that you are not the man who humiliated me." The Duke inclined his head, relief flickering in his eyes. "Gladly," he said. "Give me the chance, and I will spend every breath doing so." The crowd buzzed louder, torn between outrage and awe, but Ilara no longer cared. For the first time since that dreadful night, the balance of power was hers. She had faced him, tested him, and forced him to bend not to society but to her. And though she had not yet spoken the word forgiveness, in her heart something long dormant stirred hope. The weeks following the Montrose Gala were unlike anything London had ever seen. The scandal of the Duke kneeling before Lady Ilara spread like wildfire, but instead of diminishing her, it elevated her. Everywhere she went, people turned to stare, not with ridicule, but with fascination. She was no longer the humiliated girl abandoned at a ball. She was the woman for whom the Duke of Ashford himself had bowed. Some whispered in admiration, others in disbelief, but one truth became inescapable. The balance of power had shifted. Ilara, once the subject of pity, now held society's attention in the palm of her hand. And the Duke, proud and untouchable, seemed content to let them speak. He shadowed her at gatherings, offered her his arm in plain sight, and silenced any who dared mock her with a single, icy glance. Yet Ilara was not so easily swayed. She kept her distance, never allowing him to presume that one grand gesture had absolved him. When he sought to call on her, she refused him more than once, forcing him to endure the sting of doors closed in his face. When he managed to corner her in conversation, she listened with cool poise, granting him no more than polite replies. And still he returned, again and again, never faltering. At last, one rainy evening, he came not as a duke, but as a man. Soaked through from the storm, he stood at the Whitmore doorstep, demanding no audience, asking for nothing but the chance to speak. Against her better judgment, Ilara agreed. In the quiet of the drawing-room, with firelight flickering between them, the Duke shed the last of his defences. "I thought myself invulnerable," he confessed, his voice raw. "I thought I could cast you aside and remain untouched, but I was a fool. Every day without you has been emptier than the last. I do not seek to claim you as my possession, Ilara. I seek to stand beside you, if you will have me." The words hung heavy in the air, their sincerity undeniable. For the first time, she saw him not as the aloof Duke, but as Damien, the man behind the title, stripped of pride and arrogance. Ilara's heart ached. She remembered the tears she had shed, the cruelty of whispers, the shame of standing abandoned. Yet she also remembered the strength she had found in that crucible, the fire that had made her more than she ever thought she could be. And she realized something profound. She did not need his love to be whole, but she wanted it, if it came freely and truly. "You broke me once," she said softly, her gaze steady. "But I rebuilt myself stronger. If I choose you now, it will not be as the man who humiliated me, but as the man who knelt before me and asked for forgiveness." Damien, no longer merely the Duke of Ashford, took her hand, his thumb trembling as it brushed against her knuckles. "Then let me spend every day proving I am worthy of that choice." The decision, when it came, was not born of weakness, but of strength. Ilara inclined her head, her voice quiet but certain. "Then prove it. Not with words, not with grand gestures, but with constancy. If you can do that, Damien, then perhaps one day I will not only forgive you, I will love you without fear." His breath shuddered, relief and awe mingling in his eyes. "That is all I could ever ask." From that night forward, the change was undeniable. He did not smother her with jewels or declarations. Instead, he stood by her side at every gathering, silencing her detractors, not with arrogance, but with unwavering loyalty. He visited the poor estates of her family's lands with her, hearing the needs of tenants rather than dismissing them. He listened, learned, and, most of all, remained steadfast. Slowly, Ilara's guarded heart softened. The Duke, who had once abandoned her at a ball, became the man who cherished her in quiet moments, walking with her in the gardens at dawn, laughing with her over shared confidences, defending her honor without hesitation. And so, when the next grand ball arrived, society once again turned its gaze upon them. As the music swelled and couples took the floor, the Duke of Ashford extended his hand, not with pride, not with entitlement, but with humble devotion. Ilara met his gaze, and in the silence between them, she found her answer. She placed her hand in his. Together they stepped into the dance, no longer as a duke and a humiliated debutante, but as equals bound by something society could never dictate: love chosen freely, fiercely, and without regret. The whispers followed as they always would, but this time the whispers carried not cruelty, but awe. And for Lady Ilara Whitmore, once mocked and scorned, there was no sweeter redemption than knowing she had not only won back her place in society, She had won the heart of the man who once broke hers and made him worthy of her love.